March 3, 2008. Channel 7 News. Cedar Falls, Iowa. The anchor said, "A local homeowners association is under fire tonight, after residents claim the organization has been illegally collecting fees, enforcing unlawful rules, and threatening families with foreclosure on a street the HOA may not even legally govern." I was eating breakfast when I saw that segment. My coffee went cold, because I knew that street. I knew those families. And I knew the man behind that HOA. I had been waiting 3 years for someone to finally say it on television. My name is Harold Whitmore, and I want to tell you what that news anchor couldn't fit into a 90-second segment. The full story. Because what happened on Sycamore Ridge Drive, between 2003 and 2008, was not a neighborhood dispute. It was a calculated power grab by one man, who almost got away with it completely. This is a deed restriction document, filed in Lynn County, Iowa in 1987, 4 pages long, completely unremarkable, except for one paragraph on page 3, paragraph 7c, 11 lines. Those 11 lines, when I found them, ended everything, dissolved an HOA, returned money to 14 families, and put one man's career, reputation, and freedom in serious jeopardy. But before I show you what those 11 lines said, I need to tell you about Sycamore Ridge Drive, and the man who decided he owned it, and the 14 families who believed him, until they couldn't anymore. Because the most dangerous person is never the one who takes by force. It's the one who takes by paperwork, slowly, quietly, until one day you look around and realize everything you thought was yours isn't anymore. Sycamore Ridge Drive was built in 1987. A planned residential development, on the east side of Cedar Falls, Iowa. 14 houses, quiet street, good families. When the development was built, the original developer created a basic deed restriction agreement, standard stuff for the time, rules about fence heights, paint colors, no commercial vehicles in driveways, small things. Importantly, the original agreement did not include a mandatory homeowners association. There was no HOA board, no HOA fees, no HOA enforcement powers. Residents could form a voluntary neighborhood committee if they chose, but nobody was required to join. Nobody was required to pay anything. For 15 years, from 1987 to 2002, Sycamore Ridge Drive operated exactly like this. Neighbors got along. Nobody enforced anything strictly. People painted their houses what colors they liked. Life was simple. Then in 2002, a man named Richard Hollis bought the house at number 4, Sycamore Ridge Drive. Richard Hollis was 54 years old, retired from a mid-level management position at an insurance company, divorced, no children nearby, too much time on his hands, and an extraordinary need to be in charge of something. Within 6 months of moving in, Richard Hollis had introduced himself to every single family on the street, brought homemade cookies, offered to help with yard work, remembered everyone's birthdays. Sandra and Mike Teller, number 7, told me later, "We thought he was the nicest neighbor we'd ever had. We were embarrassed by how wrong we were." In early 2003, Richard called a neighborhood meeting, casual, coffee and donuts at his house. He said he had been thinking about how to improve the street, better curb appeal, safer for kids, maybe some shared landscaping. He suggested forming an official homeowners association, a board of 3 people, elected by residents. Small monthly fee, he suggested $25, to maintain shared green spaces. It sounded reasonable. It sounded neighborly. 9 of the 14 households signed a 1-page document that evening. Richard called it a voluntary community agreement. He had written it himself. Nobody hired a lawyer to read it. Why would they? It was just neighbors being neighbors. Richard Hollis was elected HOA president. By a show of hands. Unanimous. He was the only candidate. That 1-page document, that nobody read carefully, that nobody had a lawyer review, would cost 14 families a combined total of over $200,000 over the next 5 years, because Richard Hollis had not written a voluntary community agreement. He had written something else entirely. The Voluntary Community Agreement, as Richard had titled it, was 3 pages long, single-spaced, small font, written in language that sounded friendly, on the surface, but buried in page 2, in a paragraph that began with the words, "For the mutual benefit of all residents," was a clause that said the following, that by signing this agreement, residents acknowledged the HOA's authority to assess fees, levy fines, and place liens on properties for non-compliance with community standards. A lien on your house for not mowing your lawn on the right day. Nobody had read that far. Nobody had understood what they were signing. Richard Hollis had. He had written every word of it himself. For the first year, 2003, everything seemed normal. Monthly fees collected. Green spaces maintained. Richard sent cheerful newsletters. People thought it was working well. Then in 2004, the fees doubled. Richard said maintenance costs had increased. Presented a spreadsheet at the annual meeting. Looked professional. Nobody questioned it. In 2005, the rules started expanding. Suddenly there were regulations about holiday decorations, only approved designs. Parking rules, no vehicles older than 10 years. Visible from the street. Landscaping requirements. Specific grass heights, specific plant species. Violations meant fines. Fines started at $50, then $100, then $250. Tom and Grace Wheeler at number 11. Retired couple, fixed income, received a fine of $300 because their rose bushes were 4 inches taller than the approved height. 4 inches. When Tom Wheeler called Richard to discuss it, Richard told him that if the fine wasn't paid within 30 days, a lien would be placed on their home. Tom Wheeler was 71 years old. He had lived in that house for 16 years. He started having chest pains from the stress. His doctor told him to avoid anxiety. Richard Hollis sent him another violation notice the following week, this time for an unapproved bird feeder. By 2006, the street was divided. Some residents, the ones who had signed the agreement, were trapped, paying fees, paying fines, afraid of liens on their homes. Others, the 5 families who had not signed in 2003, received letters from Richard, informing them that as residents of Sycamore Ridge Drive, they were subject to HOA authority, regardless of whether they had signed. He cited the original 1987 deed restrictions. He claimed the HOA had authority over the entire street, not just signatories. This was the moment everything changed. Patricia Nguyen, number 9, had not signed the 2003 agreement. She was a paralegal, sharp woman, detail-oriented. When she received Richard's letter, claiming authority over her property, she did not pay. She did not call Richard. She pulled the original 1987 deed restriction documents from the Lynn County Recorder's office, all 4 pages, and she read every single word. Then she called my office. She said, "Mr. Whitmore, I think I found something, but I need you to confirm it. Because if I'm right, this entire HOA is built on nothing." Patricia brought me the 1987 deed restriction document. I read it that same afternoon, and there it was. Page 3. Paragraph 7C. 11 lines. The original developer, a man named Gerald Forsyth, long since retired to Florida, had included a specific clause in 1987. It stated that any homeowners association, formed within Sycamore Ridge Drive, would only have legal authority over properties whose owners had provided notarized written consent, filed with the Lynn County Recorder's office. Not a show of hands at a coffee meeting. Not a signature on a 1-page document, written by a neighbor, notarized, filed, on record. Richard Hollis's 2003 Voluntary Community Agreement had been signed by 9 residents, in Richard's living room, over coffee and donuts. Not notarized. Not filed anywhere. Not recorded with the county. Under the original 1987 deed restrictions, the restrictions that legally governed every single property on that street, Richard Hollis's HOA had 0 legal authority over anyone, including the 9 people who had signed. Every fee he had collected, illegal. Every fine he had levied, illegal. Every lien he had threatened, illegal. Every rule he had enforced, illegal. 5 years. 14 families. Over $200,000. Built on nothing. Absolutely nothing. I called Patricia back that evening. I said, "You're right. Every single word of it." We filed suit in Lynn County District Court. In January 2007. 14 plaintiffs. Every family on Sycamore Ridge Drive. Including the ones who had originally supported Richard. Because once they understood what had happened, not one of them stood by him. Not one. The claims were straightforward. Unjust enrichment. Fraud. Civil theft. Abuse of process for the lien threats. Richard Hollis hired an attorney, named Douglas Fenn. Experienced property lawyer. He made 3 arguments. First, that the 2003 agreement superseded the 1987 deed restrictions. We dismantled this in 2 pages. The 1987 document explicitly stated it could only be modified by a recorded county instrument. Richard's living room agreement was not a recorded county instrument. Second, that residents had voluntarily paid fees for years without objection, therefore implying consent. We argued, and the judge agreed, that payments made under threat of lien are not voluntary. They are coerced. Third, and this was creative, Fenn argued that Richard Hollis had genuinely believed he had legal authority, that this was a misunderstanding, not fraud. I asked Richard one question on cross-examination. I said, "Mr. Hollis, when you wrote the 2003 community agreement, did you read the 1987 deed restrictions before writing it?" He paused. Long pause. Then said, "I reviewed them, yes." I said, "So you read paragraph 7C. Another pause. His attorney objected. Relevance. Overruled. Richard Hollis said, "I may have read it." I said, "You may have read the paragraph that explicitly required notarized county filing for HOA authority, and then you held a coffee meeting instead." His attorney objected again. The judge sustained it, but the jury had heard it, and they had seen Richard Hollis's face. That was enough. The jury ruled in favor of all 14 plaintiffs. Richard Hollis was ordered to repay every dollar collected, fees, fines, and associated costs. Total judgment, $231,000. The HOA was formally dissolved. Every threatened lien was vacated. Every rule Richard had enforced wiped from existence. The district attorney reviewed the case for criminal fraud charges. Ultimately, given Richard's age, no prior record, and the civil judgment already in place, criminal charges were not filed. I disagreed with that decision. I still do. Richard Hollis sold his house at number 4, Sycamore Ridge Drive, 6 months after the judgment, moved away quietly. Nobody on the street said goodbye. Tom and Grace Wheeler, the retired couple with the rose bushes, used their return money to take their grandchildren to Disney World. Grace Wheeler sent me a postcard. It said, "First vacation in 5 years. Thank you." That postcard is still on my desk. Richard Hollis never physically harmed anyone, never raised his voice, never made an open threat. He used paper, quietly, patiently, one document at a time. And for 5 years, it worked perfectly, until Patricia Nguyen went to the county recorder's office and pulled a 30-year-old document that one man hoped nobody would ever read. Here is what I want you to remember. Whether it's an HOA, a landlord, an employer, or anyone who hands you a document and says, "Just sign here," read every word. Every single word. Paragraph 7C saved 14 families. What paragraph are you not reading? I'm Harold Whitmore. I'll see you in the next case.